Hello and welcome everybody to our CI stories. We have another teacher with us. Shawna Sache is here with us all the way from British Columbia to talk about her experience with CI since she jumped in the waters in 2019, so just a couple of years ago. She is a French teacher in British Columbia, and give her a warm welcome. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments, or if you're watching this on the replay, put them in the chat and we'll make sure that they get forwarded on to her. Let me go ahead and welcome her right along here. Bear with me one second. Welcome, Shawna. Thank you for coming and joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. So is there any background information you'd like to share with everybody before we get started?
I've been teaching for 15 years in British Columbia. My degree is a major in history and an extended minor in French. And so I've taught some social studies, but mostly core French. I've taught grades 9 through 12. And in my current assignment, I teach French 10, 11, and 12.
Awesome. And I read in your bio that you said that you started Comprehensible in 2019. What made you take that leap or make that change?
Yeah, so my learning about CI goes way back before 2019 to 2016 when I stumbled into a workshop on picture talk, and it was being led by Adriana Ramirez, and it was at our provincial specialist association fall conference that we have every year. And so I hadn't been to that particular conference in a while, and a colleague that I work with here who teaches Spanish, she was like, "Oh, you should come to this session with Adriana. She's awesome. She's really, really great." And so I was like, "Oh yeah, sounds good." And so I went into this session having absolutely no prior knowledge of what it meant to teach with CI. And I was, of course, blown away by the content and the concepts and the power of what Adriana was sharing. And so that was kind of the thing that sparked my curiosity into comprehensible input. And so over the next few years, I spent a lot of time learning more about CI. I tend to be a bit of a perfectionist, and I don't like to try new things if I'm not confident that I'm going to be able to do them justice. And I also felt like I had spent a really long time getting to where I was in my teaching. You know, I had my units and I had my textbooks and my binders and my projects that I like to do, and I had it all laid out. And I was a little bit reluctant or hesitant to replace that with something new or unfamiliar. But the more I learned about CI over the few years between 2016 and 2019, by the time 2019 rolled around, it felt like a necessary change to make. I had learned so much about it that I was feeling dissatisfied with what I was doing in the classroom, and increasingly so. And so then in 2019, in the second semester of the school year, I finally decided to take the leap and try a TPRS story with my classes. And that was kind of the first time that I gave it a whirl.
Well, your introduction with Adriana was, way up there because she is an incredible instructor. I've taken advanced Spanish classes with her, not for the Spanish part, but during those she teaches novels. And that she shines in teaching novels. And it's amazing what you can learn and how she teaches her novels and how she does it. So that's what I was there for. I took like 4 of her classes. Just, I didn't really care about the novels, even though I learned about some new novels. I go, ooh, I want to teach those in my class. But it was her approach to the novels that I learned. She's just an amazing, amazing teacher. Amazing.
Yeah, she's a real gift to the profession, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And I've met her in person a few times at the Agen conference in France that I go to for a few years. So I've met her in person. She's just amazing all the way around. Yeah. What do you think, or what changes have you seen, positive or negative, from the time that you were on traditional teaching to moving over to CI?
I feel like CI helps me to better reach all of my students, not just the students who are especially academically motivated or very good at traditional studying or memorization, um, or the students who we might stereotypically think would be good at a language class, but being able to really reach everybody, because really we are all wired to acquire language. And so CI has allowed me to, or enabled me to break through some of that resistance that we tend to get in the language classroom, where we get kids coming in saying like, I suck at French, I can't do French. I mean, even in my adult conversations with people, when I meet people and they say, oh, what do you do, right? And I say, oh, I'm a French teacher. 99% of the time, people's response is, oh, I was terrible at French, or I hated French, I could never get French. And CI really breaks that barrier.
Yep, I would agree. The difference is everyone can acquire a language unless there's some kind of actual brain issue in there.
Sure.
Because even
Yeah.
kids with special needs pick up their first language. That's acquiring the language. But they're right. Not everybody, in fact, very few, if any, actually can learn a language through the rote memorization and the grammar rules, because you may have those all in your head, but when you actually have to put it together and make it live, it doesn't always come together. I always use the analogy of, you might know all the rules of the football game and you might know the playbook of the football game, but that doesn't mean you can show up on Friday night and actually play football when you get out there. And
Yeah,
it's the kind of the
exactly.
same thing with language.
Exactly.
Yes. And I
See,
agree that,
I think, sorry. Yeah,
okay.
I think it makes students less apprehensive to try also and to engage with the language. And I think it increases their willingness to just engage and be willing to make mistakes,
Yeah.
and not to be fearful that that mistake is a sign of like any kind of inadequacy or stupidity or anything, but it's just a natural part of the learning process, and that of course we make mistakes as we are in the process of acquiring language.
Absolutely. And I agree also with you that it's a level playing field. It makes
Mm-hmm.
everybody equal in that way. So you don't have the academic kids who can memorize tons of vocabulary competing
Yeah.
against the kids who don't even pick up the book in there.
Yeah.
So 100% agree with that. And then, I just lost my thought. What I was going to say about something you had just said. I lost it. Anyway, so maybe it'll
Okay.
come back. Old age sets in very easily.
It happens.
So how did you, I'm sure, when you did it, did you start and stagger it? Like I had one French teacher at my school. We were all CSCI teachers except for her. She says, I'm not doing it, not because I don't believe in it, but because I'm too close to retirement. So she
Mm.
says, I don't want to change everything right when I'm like 2-3 years from the end. So
Yeah.
she held off and held off. And then she's decided she was going to try it with her level ones only and kind of phase it in, do level one,
Mhm.
those level ones, and everybody thereafter would do it for her last couple of years. But then her other kids were really upset. Her twos and her threes and her fours were like, why aren't we having that kind of fun? And so she's
Yeah.
like, dang it, I had to go all levels all at once. She wasn't trying to do all that work. Um, did you do that? Did you go in all, or did you stagger it?
Okay, so when I started in 2019 with my first TPRS story, because I had spent 3 years learning and researching and kind of compiling what I thought would be useful materials, when I started, I had the intention to go all in with all levels. And we got through one TPRS story cycle using Adriana Ramirez TPRS stories, and then COVID hit.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we were shut down, and we ended up going to teaching online. And so I actually at that point was incredibly grateful that I had made the shift, and that I wasn't stuck at home trying to turn the textbook into something that we could do online, because I think lended itself more to,
Oh, yeah,
I mean, it certainly
absolutely.
wasn't ideal by any means, but it was something meaningful that we could do through remote learning still. And so then when we came back, our district made the decision at that time, because we were still in like pandemic circumstances. We did something called an octet system. And so I had one class of students all day, every day for, I can't remember now if it was 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And I taught them French. Like that was their French 10 course,
Hmm.
was like 6 weeks or 8 weeks of French with me all day, every day. So we went all in with CI at that point.
You had them all day for like 6 hours?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't
Yes.
imagine.
And I've never been more grateful to be a French teacher because I still felt like there were so many different things that we could do in the day. Like we could do TPRS, and then we could do independent reading, and we could do a whole class novel study, and we could do music, and we could do like a picture talk. And there were so many ways to
Yeah.
still keep the variety in the day, while acquiring the language.
Now that's why I could
But
never
it
be.
was wild. It was
Yeah.
wild.
I couldn't imagine
Yeah.
because that's my fear of like becoming an elementary school teacher where I'm stuck with those
Yeah.
kids all day. And then what if,
Yeah.
what if it's that challenging student that you have, those kind of students, I'm like, when's that bell ringing? When's that bell ringing?
Yeah.
Those types of
Yeah.
those students. So I
Yeah.
couldn't imagine for six hours, but they got tons and tons of French in that
They
six
did.
weeks. So
They
they
did.
would
I mean,
really
it was
acquire.
incredible. It was incredible to see what they could acquire. And so I guess in response to your question, I guess it was kind of staggered, but not by my own choosing, right?
Yeah.
Because I had like my French 10 kids for like a month and a half. And then I had my French 11 kids for a month and a half. And then I had my French 12 kids for a month and a half. And then I had French 10 kids again for a month and a half, right? So it was kind of staggered.
But not only do they get the intense French, you got the intense practice with CI,
Yes.
having to do it for six
Yeah.
hours with the same kids
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
So that was a really intense way of it's kind of like
It was.
immediate immersion, complete
Yeah.
immersion right in the in
Yeah.
the
Right
skill
into
of
the
doing
deep
it.
end. Yeah.
You know, I don't know if I could have done that back when I started back in 2001, and I was hired on an emergency permit, which means I had a degree, but I did not have teaching school. So they
Right.
said they would give me a temporary license while I was going to teaching school. So I
Hmm.
was doing that, and that first semester I sucked because I taught the way I was taught, and I took
Yeah.
French, German, and Spanish in high school and college. So I
Hmm.
just did what those teachers did, and I was bored. My kids were bored. It was the textbook. It was an old textbook, really, really old.
Yeah.
It did not go well, and then I knew there was no way I was going to be able to do this for 30 years. So I had to
Yeah.
find something. So I found Blaine Ray at the time in 2001 around Christmas time, and then I went in whole hog. Second semester I came back, and it was
Hmm.
like night and day. If I
Yeah.
hadn't have found that, I don't think I'd still be teaching. I could not do the textbook but I
Hmm.
did go all in,
Hmm.
without looking back at all. But I had,
Yeah.
only hour-long classes, and I scripted everything out. So I mean, I was reading from little script cards that I wrote
Hmm.
all my questions and everything. And I didn't do what I do now where I can freeform it. It was all scripted, and the kids
Yes.
could only change the names, the color of the hair, the color of the eyes, the name of the store. That was about
Hmm.
it. The rest, it was
Hmm.
all pre-planned because I couldn't think on my feet. And like
Yeah.
you, Spanish was not my major. So what I teach, so and I hadn't even taken Spanish classes in like 5 or 6 years because I majored in
Hmm.
German. So
Hmm.
it was, I had to get my feet wet with speaking the language, and hadn't
Yeah.
had to do that in so many years. So I
Yeah.
definitely applaud you for, that. I don't know if I could do that 6 hours. That would have probably, I don't know
You
if I would
know,
have made it.
it had its challenges, but it was also kind of a special time. Like you really got to know your kids, and it really allowed for very early intervention in any kind of like behavioral or academic things that were arising. In a typical semester, I can have 120 different students, and so it's a lot of kids to keep track of. But at that time, with one class of kids,
You could
it
really
was nice
focus.
to get to know them really well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I really like about CI is getting to know the students. And my
Yeah.
goal is always to find something funny about them so
Yeah.
that I can write a story about them, and they all are looking forward. here we're on what's called a 4x4, which I absolutely hate, where I have the kids only for 20 weeks, and I have them for an hour and a
Okay.
half a day, but 5 days a week. They think we
Yeah.
can cram everything in and teach all that, and you really can't, because they
Yeah.
need time to process, and we just don't have
Yeah.
all the time. But so we're in our 4th week right now of that new semester, and the
Mm-hmm.
kids are amazed at what they can do and the stories that they're hearing. And I find little things, like I told them today, we were doing something, and all these girls, 2 girls had like 6 backpacks right next to their chairs, and I'm like, why do you have 6 backpacks? They're like, well, we got a sports one, our school one, and they have them on their back and on their front, and it just looked like there's a whole pile of backpacks over there. So I go, stop, kids, I gotta wait. I got an idea for a story. I gotta write it down, or
Yeah.
I'm gonna forget it. And so I wrote a story this afternoon during my prep about these girls who steal backpacks from their students so they can eat their lunches. So that was the story that came out because of that. I had another
Yeah.
story, a kid the other day. We were talking, just getting to know the kid, and he wants to be a cook. And he's in Spanish 2. The girls were in Spanish 1, but he's in Spanish 2. And he said, I said, what kind of restaurant do you want to open? He goes, I want to open an elegant restaurant. And I said, what do you want to serve? And he said, vaca, vache in French. So I'm like, so I took it that he wanted to serve cows. So he
Oh,
wanted a restaurant for cows, not
the
serve.
cows
He
are
was
going to
trying to
come
say,
and enjoy some fine dining.
yeah. So he was
Yeah.
thinking steak. He was trying to find a way to say
Yeah.
steak and circumlocute. I
Yeah.
didn't take it that way, so I wrote a whole story for today about him and his elegant restaurant for cows. And they had
That's so.
cow pizza that had hay instead of cheese,
Oh,
and
yeah.
a salad with a glaze of sweet grass dressing, just
Yeah.
playing with those kinds of things that were kind of fun. So that's what I really enjoy about that, when you get to know the kids and you can play with them a little bit and get them
That's.
involved in language. And a kid last week said, and he's an average kid, like when I look at his grades, he's a 9th grader, he's a C-D student, and he's like,
Mhm.
after our quiz, he said, why is reading English so boring? And I didn't know what he was going for. Like, what do you mean? Why is it, it's like reading any other language. It's no boring or more interesting than anything else. He goes, I mean, I really enjoyed reading this quiz. I mean, it was really fun. And I'm like, oh, now I get what you're talking about. I go, because I'm writing the stories about you guys, that makes
Yeah.
it much more interesting than what they do in English class. And so
Yeah.
that makes a big difference. So great way with CI, when you had that 6 hours, that, allowed you to really, really get to know those kids and delve deep. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Did you have any challenges other than the 6 hours and COVID hitting? Any other challenges that you had?
I guess initially wrapping my head around what does a day in a CI classroom look like, right? So that was a big hurdle for me to kind of overcome. I think that as teachers, we're like naturally control freaks,
Mm-hmm.
and we like structure and organization. Um, and so when I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to move away from the textbook, the biggest challenge was, okay, well, if I'm not using the textbook, then what am I filling our time with? And so just feeling like I had enough meaningful, level appropriate content was a challenge, right? Acquiring all of those materials, learning what's out there, um, filling my tool belt with different tools and things that I could use, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we started, there was no such thing as picture talk or movie talk or any of those types of things.
Mhm.
There was originally 7 steps to TPRS that we were supposed to do, and we were
Yeah.
supposed to complete all 7 steps in an hour class. So it was a sprint. Because, I mean, I don't remember all the 7 steps, but, you had to introduce the vocabulary. And I remember one of the steps was you had to repeat the story 3 times. We didn't even do circling questions or
Okay.
anything like that. To get the repetition, we just told the story, the exact same story, word for word, 3 times in a row. And then we would ask comprehension questions, but not circling type questions. And then
Right.
at the end, we were supposed to change the perspective, either present to
Mm-hmm.
past or past to future or from third person to first person, and do that
Mm-hmm.
and then retell the story all over again. These were all the
Mm-hmm.
steps that we had. There's a couple I'm missing in between there. And it was like sprint, trying to get that
Mm-hmm.
all done. And then the steps went down to 3, which made it a little bit more manageable. But that's all that we had. We knew just to go through that sequence. That's why we planned our day. That
Yeah.
sequence is what we did. And then when we got the variety that came in, where picture talk came in, and movie talk comes in, and
Mm-hmm.
card talk comes in, all of those types of things that allowed us to vary things up. And it's really
Mm-hmm.
just a spin on the same idea. You
Mm-hmm.
know, telling a
Yeah.
story, whether it's a
Yeah.
story from a video or it's a story from students' interests or it's a story that, the class makes up. It's still all these different stories, or readings is another version of
Mm-hmm.
a story. So that allowed us to kind of branch out. And even in the beginning, we only had a few novels
Yeah.
that were all written by Blaine Ray. And I mean, I'm not knocking Pobriana or Povran. I'm not knocking it, but I have that book memorized because I taught it for like 4 years. It's all we had, and only thing that
Yeah.
could be done for a level 1. And
Yeah.
so that's the only book they could do. We started at first day of school, the first week of school, sorry. And then
Mm-hmm.
now we've got so many novels, and Adriana has written such beautiful novels that are more authentic and realistic, and
Mm-hmm.
that we can
Mm-hmm.
use. So we have much more variety. So I agree
Yeah.
that would be challenging. But you came in at a time where we had a lot of different activities than
Yes.
back in the
And
90s and
it's funny
2000s.
because that in and of itself has posed a challenge too, because at times it can feel very overwhelming to know what to use and what to implement. And that's been kind of trial and error, um, because there's just not enough time to do everything. And
Yep.
I heard this great advice, and I can't remember where, but it has stuck with me, that you can do anything, but you can't do everything.
Yes.
And so just the trial and error of finding what fits for me in my context with my students, with my personality and my teaching style. And I'm still trying different things. Last semester I tried classroom jobs. That was something that I had not done before, and it just didn't flow. It didn't fit with me, my students, my style. And so I've abandoned that for now. Maybe one day I'll come back to it and want to try it again. But it's just I tried it on, and I feel okay about leaving that to the side for now, because there are lots of. But for somebody else, classroom jobs is critical and enjoyable and central to their classroom, which
Yeah.
I think is the great thing about CI too, because it does provide so many different avenues for meaningful meaningful inputs and acquisition.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm with you. I mean, I pick and choose. I try things that people have done, and
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing this for 23 years, but I'm still learning. I still change. I made a huge change this semester because my clientele was very different. I had a really rough clientele last
Yeah.
semester because I moved back to high school. I taught high school for 11 years, then I went to middle school for 10, and now I'm back in high school. And
Mm-hmm.
post COVID high school is very different from pre COVID high school. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had jobs, and I was successful jobs in my middle school and in my previous high school time, but
Mm-hmm.
they didn't work with this school. So I quickly threw them out and did something different. So
Yeah.
that's a great way to be able to do that. And the thing I was thinking of, my only goal, this is kind of like you can do anything, but you can't do everything.
Mm-hmm.
My thing is, my only goal in class is to speak the target language as much as possible and make it understandable. If
Yeah.
I get those two things done, that
Mm-hmm.
class was successful.
Yeah.
So that's what I always think about. So if the kids go, oh, because it was homecoming a couple weeks ago. We have 2 homecomings a
Mm-hmm.
year because of the semesters. So the kids go, did you go to homecoming? Well, they want me to tell the story about it, but tell them in English. Well, I told them in Spanish what it was
Yeah.
and made sure it was understandable. And they go, we didn't cover anything that's on the board. And they're thinking, woohoo, we won.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
I won because those kids were paying attention, trying to understand, and the class was in the target language the whole time. So
Yeah.
it was a win-win for both of us. They thought they won. I know I won. And
Yes.
so, that's like you said, you can do anything, just not everything, and you can adapt it.
Mhm.
The showing a movie, that's actually part of our curriculum, is to show a movie. So
Mhm.
I can show a Disney movie as long as it's in Spanish,
Mhm.
and put the subtitles on there so they can understand it. But we can do anything with
Yeah.
comprehensible input, and textbook really kind of limits what you can do, but it gives you
Mhm.
that backbone that you have. So you don't know what to do, we'll just turn the next page, it will tell you what to do. So there's
Yeah.
that kind of support that you have with a textbook, and there's not that much support with CI. You're on your own to build your own curriculum, and it can be
Mhm.
scary if
Mhm.
you're all by yourself. That's a good
Yeah.
question. Are you all by yourself doing CI where you are, or do other teachers in your?
So there's a Spanish teacher at my school who also is a CI teacher, and she started with CI about 1 year before I did, which was lovely because I was able to like, I don't speak Spanish, but I was able to go into her Spanish classroom and observe her teaching with CI. And being not a Spanish speaker myself, I think made that an even more powerful experience because I would walk out of that room after an hour and I could just feel the language swirling and resonating in my mind and percolating. And it gave me a real appreciation for just the power that
Yep,
those strategies have.
it is. I mean, when I my first introduction to TPRS CI, because it wasn't even called CI back then, it was just called TPRS, and it
Hmm.
branched off from there. But we were doing I was it was not it was a kind of an induction program in the Los Angeles area where I was teaching. Once a month, you'd go in and learn some different strategies. Well, the two things that really opened my eyes were, one, this was a Spanish 1 class, and this teacher brought her whole class in, and she did this inner circle, outer circle with Pobreana, and
Okay.
she picked a scene at random. She like shuffled up cards. She pulled out a scene, and she told them, "This is the scene. The outer circle plays this character. The inner circle
Hmm.
plays this character, and now you communicate back and forth." And it was an argument in that story, um, between the father and the daughter. The daughter wants to go on the exchange trip, and the father
Hmm.
says, "We can't afford it. Um, we can't pay." And she's like, "But
Hmm.
it's free. But it's free. But it's free." And so these level 1 kids in November, level 1 kids, were able to engage in that. I mean, obviously, very short, you know, contrite phrases, but that they were communicating. And then that was the demo that they did. And then in class, it was his sister. I mean, sorry, the sister was the teacher who had the demo. The brother was the one who taught my little cadre of teachers, and he
Hmm.
did an indigenous Spanish language, or Native American in Latin America Spanish, called Quechua. So he did that language. There are very few, if any, cognates. And what made it powerful for me is because my French is horrible, but I can understand French. My German and my Spanish, those were at the demos, are always in Spanish,
Yeah.
French, or German. And so I really didn't feel the impact of what kids
Hmm.
could learn because I understood everything that was going on. And I don't know what was coming from what I was being taught right then, or what was coming back from memory from my previous education.
Hmm.
But with Quechua, I knew it was zero, and I still remember
Yeah.
two out of the three words that we learned, and that was
Yeah.
back in 2001. So
Hmm.
24 years later, I can still remember two out of the three words, and only had that experience in 1 hour, one class, 20 some years ago. So
It's
it's really,
incredible. It's incredible how it really does reach us on a deeper level, right? Where we're truly acquiring the language, not just memorizing it for a
yeah.
quiz or for a test or for some kind of artificial um, assessment, but that we're really able to adopt that language and to see that authentic proficiency.
And it makes sense because we know through history, before there was formal education, how did we teach generation from generation? Through stories.
Hmm.
We remember things with stories. You put
Yeah.
something into a story, you're going to remember it. I remember even one of the techniques they told us about memorizing telephone numbers and stuff put the numbers in a story. There's 9 somethings and there's another
Yeah.
1 something.
Yeah.
Putting it into a story helps you remember it, and so it's a really powerful way to teach anything. And
It's so
even I've
true.
had some math teachers come in and some English teachers come in and see what we're doing in there, and they're like, "Oh, I could apply this to math. I
Mhm.
could do this to there. I can do the circling type questions about the math. Do we
Yeah.
subtract right here or do we add right here? Which do you can do those kinds of things, and it gets the stuff more ingrained in the brain than it does because it
Yeah.
engages
It
so
really
much
does.
more of
It
the
really
brain.
does. My
Yeah.
daughter's in middle school and she came home a couple of weeks ago and she was learning about the Kamagata Maru and she was confused. She couldn't wrap her head around the historical events and the significance and all the different places and people who were involved. And so I put on my CI teacher hat and I sat down with her and because I have the history major, so I knew the history. I sat her down and we had a big sheet of paper and I told it as a story and I drew my stick people and my boats and my countries and my arrows and explained it as we went and stopped and questioned along the way. And when we finished, she was like, "Oh, I totally understand it now." And so yeah, I mean, it absolutely can be applied to so many different subject areas.
Yeah. And it was so sad because I love history, but I did not like it in school because I can't memorize names and dates and
Yeah.
all that stuff. And when I
Yeah.
was a kid, back in the 80s, that's what you do. You memorized
Hmm.
who, what, where, when. And
Yeah.
now it's more about what did it cause and what changes did that, thing, what brought on this change, this
Hmm.
part of history.
Hmm.
It's much more. But I love to go watch historical movies on, either
Yeah.
TV or at the movies because history's all about stories, and the textbook took the story out of
Yeah.
it, and so it made it
Yeah.
much less interesting. And I had a very powerful history teacher in 8th grade, Mrs. K. She would wear often a purple straitjacket, and she would write the notes with the chalk in her mouth on the
Oh my
board.
gosh.
And she was, we ask her like, "How old are you?" She's like, we guess. She's like 70. She goes, "Yeah, I've been there a couple of times." And she'd act like she had reincarnated. And then she would tell us the stories of history from the perspective of being like a servant or something like she was the maid in the White
Mhm.
House during George Washington's presidency. And she told the stories and things that happened during his presidency from that
Mhm.
perspective. And when she did the Civil War, the American Civil War, she drew on the carpet with her chalk a line, and she drew an N on one side for the North and an S on the other side for the South. And she played both parts. She went back and forth.
Yeah.
And that's how you got to really live. And I taught at a high school where the teacher only took $1 salary. He was a doctor. They named a building at USC, University of Southern California, after him. Um, so he was working there just to teach. He didn't care about the money, but he would turn whatever unit they were on, he would turn his classroom into that place. The music, the decorations. When it was the 1920s during the Great Depression, he sold apples for a penny outside. He dressed up in a pauper's outfit and he would dress up. But you go in there, it was playing the music of the 20s, the
Mhm.
clothing that he wore, and he had displays like mannequins of clothing. We all teachers wanted to go into his classroom
Yeah.
every time he changed a unit just to experience that, to bring it
Yeah.
alive. It's all going back to that story stuff that we do, where CI can really the concepts of it can apply to so many other things than just language.
Mhm. And I think actually that's what is so powerful about Adriana's approach to teaching novels. Because I've done some sessions with her, watched some workshops she's got online and stuff too about how her approach to teaching novels. And she talks about how you're not teaching the novel, you're creating an experience. And
Yes.
she always has a theme song, and it's about creating that immersive experience for your students.
Yeah. She really takes a book, a two-dimensional book, and makes it three-dimensional,
Hmm.
like all
Yes.
around, like the old-fashioned what do they call IMAX movies, not the new ones where they're
Yeah.
just big screen, but the old ones
Yes.
where you looked up and there was on there, and you look back and you're
Yeah.
you're completely
Yeah. It's
immersed in
all
it.
around. Yeah.
It's amazing what she does with a
Hmm.
novel.
Hmm.
Amazing. does. And I aspire to be her with a novel, but I am not even anywhere close. Not anywhere close with a novel like that. A couple other questions I had here. Do you overall language proficiency, what differences did you see in your students pre and post CI?
Pre-CI, I think that students could demonstrate language-like behaviors in the classroom, where they maybe knew what to memorize or what question might be asked, or be able to like really rehearse something and perform well. But if they were asked a month later, or certainly 6 months later, a year later, none of that would have stuck. And when faced with any kind of spontaneous conversation or interaction, it would kind of be a deer in the headlights, right? Whereas now with CI, I think that the true proficiency is much higher. I mean, it's astounding what students can do. I mean, just how much they can output by the end of one semester of French class, right? From all of the exposure to the language. And we do a lot of independent reading in my classroom too. I'm a huge advocate for FVR. I start every single class with 10 minutes of independent reading, and I sacrifice it for absolutely nothing. Like, there is not a single day where we do not read for 10 minutes. And just seeing vocabulary and sentence structures and complex grammatical structures that students are able to use spontaneously in their speaking and in their writing. And I know that I've not taught that directly, but they've acquired it naturally through repeated exposure to it and through seeing it in context. It's just incredible.
It is. Stephen Krashen says 70% of what you can do in any language comes from reading. And it doesn't matter what you read, as long as you are reading and you're understanding what you read. And they pick up. I had a kid who he wanted, because I have the silent reading too in my classroom, and I have a wide variety. And at the time, I also taught native speakers. So I had native speaker books in there, not just the CI books. And he wanted to read Harry Potter. And I was not going to stop him from reading Harry Potter, even though I knew that was going to be really, really difficult for him. Because our AP teacher tried to teach Harry Potter with her class, and she says, just way too hard. There's just way too much specialized vocabulary in there. But this kid loved Harry Potter, and so who was I to say no? He struggled with it. He struggled, but he was going through it, and I know he was getting stuff out of it, because I'm like, what's this word he's writing in this paper? And I'm like, I don't know what that word is. I look it up, Harry Potter word. I don't know what that word. Harry Potter word. Harry Potter word. He was picking it up. And he took French. He took Spanish for 4 years. And I had him for first 2, and then he had another teacher for 3 and 4. And she said he finally finished the first Harry Potter book by the end of his 4th year. It took him 4 years. But he kept at it, and what he acquired from that was just amazing of what he could do because of reading. And that's why I tell the kids, if you don't like reading, it's because you just haven't found the right book yet. You got to find something that really interests you, and then find that in a book, and then you'll really enjoy what you're reading. Reading,
100%.
I love reading, but I think I only read one book that they assigned me, because you told me to read a book? Oh, no. You can't tell me to read a book. I'll read whatever I want to dang read. And so I did that. But the only book I read, I remember, The Day No Pigs Would Die. That was the only book that I read. And then I read Animal Farm, but a year after it was assigned to me. And I liked that book too. But I was reading Stephen King. I was reading things that were very interesting to me. But reading things that were forced me to read was boring. And I didn't enjoy that task. And so finding what you really enjoy to read is powerful. And I'm with you. I don't give up anything for free voluntary reading. I walk around my room just so I can monitor kids, but I'm reading while I'm walking around the room. And then they're always saying, you're never reading Spanish. I'm like, because I know Spanish. So I'm reading my French books or German books. I've gone through a whole bunch of French books I've been reading. I say, I'm reading another language. I'm not reading English. So I'm doing just like you. And I'm struggling just like you, because I'm where you are in French type of
Mhm,
thing. So I
mhm.
have to struggle that way as well. But they see that model, and that it's how important it is. And when we don't give it up for anything, we have
Yeah,
to do it. After a fire drill, they interrupted our silent reading. When we come
yeah,
back,
back to
10
the
more minutes of
reading.
silent reading. Yep, we got to get that
Yeah,
in no matter what. We can drop this activity, but we can't drop that activity. It
yes,
shows them how
yeah.
powerful it truly, truly is.
Yeah, and I like you. I mean, I also read with my students when we read for the first 10 minutes of every class, and I love that time. And I tell them how much I love and appreciate that time. And they all of them come to love and appreciate that time too. And I when I'm sitting there reading, I look up and do my scan of the room every once in a while from my spot to just look, because when I tell colleagues or other language teachers that we read for the first 10 minutes of every class, you get a lot of like, well, are they really reading, or are they pretending to read? You can tell what it looks like when somebody's reading versus when somebody's pretending to read. And my approach when I notice a student consistently not reading is that I come from a place of that student has not found the right book yet.
Right. Yep.
And so my approach always is either a little sticky note onto their desk or a quiet little conversation like, oh, I've noticed that you haven't been super engaged with the book that you have right now. Maybe it's time to put it back. Remember, you're allowed to abandon a book anytime. You're under no obligation to finish everything you pick up. There's lots of other choices on the shelf. Let me know if you want some suggestions or some help. Um, and I think that gives them the kind of the validation or
Mm-hmm.
the understanding that it's not that they just don't want to read or can't read, it's that the book wasn't a good fit.
Yep. Yeah, I do walk around because I've had kids who are a little sneakier. I can tell when they have the book upside down, they're not reading, because there's some of those.
Yes.
I had one kid, my French book, one of the French books I had, got mixed in, and he was reading the French, so I knew
Mhm.
that he wasn't reading it because it was in
Yes.
French.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other time, I found some kids who put a book that they want to read
Inside of
behind the book, so I can't see. So walking around has helped, and I'll stand by next to someone, and if I don't see them reading, I'll say, you might want to find another book or something like that.
yeah.
What they always yell at me about is, it's always funny. I don't set the timer right away. I don't start the timer right away.
Yeah.
They're like, you haven't started the timer. I'm like, you're supposed to be reading anyway. They go, but you haven't
Yeah.
started the timer. I go, I don't start the timer until I've done taking
Until everybody's
attendance,
reading.
because I want that
Yeah.
minutes too. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
shortchange my minutes. So you get to
Yeah.
have a couple extra minutes while I'm taking attendance, but you should all be reading. You should not be waiting for the timer to get started. The timer is
Mm-hmm.
for me to get my full 10 minutes of reading in,
Yeah.
so I can get through. And I go, how many novels I've gone through. I tell them how many counts. And one teacher did a really great idea, which I really, really liked, and I really need to implement. Um, but it costs a little bit of money, because she takes pictures of her kids with the novel every time they finish, and she
Mm.
posts it up on a bulletin board. So the printing of the pictures is where the money comes
Yeah.
in, but she puts that up there every time, and she'll put them like a little fanned out picture. So if the kid's got 5 books, there's like 5 pictures that are fanned out over for
Yeah.
that child, and then
Yeah.
she gives awards for how many novels that they actually finished at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Just a little trinket, a little piece of chocolate, or like a candy bar, not a little one, but a little bit bigger chocolate, and a little certificate that they have read 2 books or 4 books or how many books it was. And she celebrated that. She had a reading wall that she just loved to do, and I really like that type of a thing. Number one, I don't have the wall space right now, but also just the printing of the pictures all the time gets to be. She always liked to do that and print the pictures and print pictures, and
Time consuming and money. So my students have a little log in their reading package where they can make a list of what books they've read. But when I give that to them, I make it really clear to them that that's for them and that's not for me. To me, it's not important how many books they've read
yeah,
necessarily, because more doesn't always mean better. And students are choosing books of different levels or different lengths, or some of them like to reread a book 2 or 3 times because they get more out of it each time. Um, but some of us really like to track the books that we read, right? I tell them I love to read. I have the Goodreads app on my
Yeah.
phone, and I like to keep track of what books I read, because if somebody asks me for a book recommendation, I can't remember what I've read. And so I open up the app and I scroll through and I see what I rated things, and I'm like, oh yeah, I really liked that one. So yeah, I've got trackers that my students fill out for themselves, but
Yeah.
nothing that I
I
post.
do the same thing. It's a reader's log, and I tell them because they don't get to keep the book; they have to put it back on my shelf. And
Yeah.
during COVID, I let them check them out, but after COVID, they go back on the shelf. So it was a page number. Write down what page number you left off on, so you know
Mm-hmm.
where you came out. So that way,
Yeah.
they didn't think it as a grading thing. It was more of a
Yeah.
what page was I on type thing, and they had a
Yes.
list of
Yeah.
books.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that not reading an X number of books is a good or a bad thing, but it was just a way that teacher celebrated them for
Celebrate.
reading
Totally.
to make it such a big deal because she wanted them to
Yeah.
realize that reading doesn't have to be boring. Reading is
Yeah.
fun, and you can challenge yourself to grow and bigger. That's why I've never limited what my kids read. They can pick any book on there, whether it's a level 3 and they're in a level 1. I don't care. I tell them
Mm-hmm.
the main thing is it interesting? And we do little promotion commercials.
Mm-hmm.
Little we talk. I say, tell me about your book you're reading. Tell the class so someone else might want to read that. And there's a
Yeah.
book. I don't know. You probably don't have the French. I don't think there's a French version. This was written by a middle school. They wrote these 2 books as a
Mm-hmm.
class, and it
Okay.
was The Bakers Go to Peru is the first
Okay.
one, and the second one is The Curse of the Shrunken Head.
Okay.
And in the book, so we read the first one together as a
Mm-hmm.
whole class study, and it's about these Americans who are kind of typical American tourists. They're
Mm-hmm.
going to another culture. They're not appreciating the culture. They're making,
Mm-hmm.
kind of goofing off, like just adding O's and A's to words to make things. And they're in a museum and they're not really respecting the culture in the museum and stuff like that. Kind of doing the typical American, foreign tourism type thing, expecting everybody to speak English, all that kind of stuff. But these kids, the brother and a sister, steal a shrunken head from the museum. So they steal all of this, and it's about all this bad luck that comes from it, because that's what the culture says, that the shrunken
Mm-hmm.
heads bring all these bad luck, and it's a real shrunken head, and there's certain tribes that used to do that type of thing, and
Mm-hmm.
they were talking about that, and then after they realized all this bad stuff was happening, they returned. They didn't return to the museum. They put it on an altar in the village of the native people who had that. So that's where it ends. Then they go back to the United States and everything's hunky dory. But when she at the last scene oh no, they end that. The second book, I read the first page. She gets home, she's opens up her luggage, and inside are 2 things that weren't supposed to be there. One, the shrunken head, and 2, a letter from the tribe. And
Mm.
the tribe wants her to come back and marry someone in the tribe. That's what she wants to do. So I read that much. I go, all I do is she opened up her suitcase and 2 things were in it: a letter and the shrunken head. And I closed the book. And they're like, wait, what happens
Like
next?
they're all dying to read it, right? They're
You'll
just,
have to read it.
yeah,
And I only have 2 copies, so you're going to have to fight on who gets it. And
yeah.
they're like, what? Because it just leads them in. So we do a lot of things like that. If there's sequels,
Mm-hmm.
or we talk about it, there's one called Super Hamburguesas, Super Hamburgers. And
Yes.
one of the
Yeah, we've got
guys,
that one in French too.
they have that one in French. So I tell them, oh my gosh, there's a story, and the kid goes in the bathroom, and he goes to the bathroom, and he doesn't wash his hands, and he comes back and makes hamburgers. And middle school kids were like all into that kind of thing.
Yes.
So, they want to
Yes.
read that. So we do those little advertisements to kind of get kids
Yeah.
to want to read books, or get it beyond just the cover page of what the book is, to kind of see, because the cover doesn't always tell you what's kind of inside.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to
Mm-hmm.
be interesting in there. So I
That's
agree.
part of what I enjoy about reading, with like me reading when my students are reading too, because it gives me those kind of natural opportunities to talk about books with my students, to do a little book talk. if I start a new book today and I read the first chapter, I might, after we finish our reading time, spend 5 minutes doing a little chat with, drawing on the board while I'm speaking in the target language, giving them a little bit of information what the book is about, or if I finish something, or I read a really hard book too, and it was a fantasy book, and I don't typically read a lot of fantasy, and so there was a lot of language that was like unique to that
Yep.
particular world. And so I talked to them about how hard it was and how I was having a dilemma because I was halfway through the book, but I felt like I needed to reread the first half of the book before I continued in the book. So just, I think, opening those conversations about reading, and helping our students to build identities as readers too. What's their reading personality? What are their reading interests? Really opens up a lot of potential for acquisition.
And then sharing our own struggles with it, because
Mm-hmm.
they think that they are, for lack of a better term, dumb because they're having
Mm-hmm.
trouble understanding this sentence or that word, or they looking at the page and not getting any of it. And or like,
Yeah.
we're all there struggling. We're
Yeah.
all there struggling.
Yeah.
My French is much better than it used to be. I dropped out of French. I had Intro to French Lit was my last class. We read Huis Clos and we read L'étranger, but I
Mm-hmm.
had to drop out because my school threatened me. They said, you need to start taking
Oh
your
no.
core classes, and you keep taking these language classes. I was taking French, German, and Spanish simultaneously. And like, you
Yeah.
need to take your core classes or we're going to kick you out. I wasn't taking any
Yeah.
of the required classes. I'm like, that's because these classes in language only come once every 4 years. Some of the
Yeah.
classes don't come all the time.
Yeah.
So I had to give up the French at the time. But I read up to that point, but it was really rusty. That was way back in
Mm-hmm.
1989, 1990. And so
Yeah.
reading there, but I started getting to some harder books, and I'm like, yeah, I'm struggling. These books,
Mm-hmm.
Paul I can read, and a couple of the
Yeah.
other ones I can read. But when we start getting the more difficult ones, I'm struggling just like you. You see me flipping
Mm-hmm.
back to the back of the
Mm-hmm.
page too, a lot to go through. So sharing
Yeah.
those struggles, letting them know that they're not alone, that everyone goes through these struggles,
Mm-hmm.
helps them. And then I like the idea that you said about identifying self as a reader. That you
Mm-hmm.
that it's a kind of a twist on what a teacher I work with always said. She goes, I want my kids to picture themselves as a Spanish speaker. Even though they're level
Mm-hmm.
one, day one, I want them to identify right away as a Spanish speaker. And it's the same kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing. If you can picture yourself in the shoes of that role, you're going to be much more successful and take
Yeah.
on challenges that you might not have otherwise done. So I think
Yeah.
that's really, really
Absolutely.
powerful.
Yeah.
Really, really powerful. One last, well, I got two last questions for you.
Okay.
Um, do you, how do you connect and continue to learn if you've only got the other one teacher in your area? What
Mm-hmm.
ways do you connect to keep your CI fresh, or to learn, or to um, create a community with yourself?
Mm-hmm. I love listening to podcasts, and I think that in the last couple of years, there's been just a huge influx of podcasts about language teaching in general and CI teaching in particular. I have a 20-minute drive to work and a 20-minute drive home, and it's like an ideal amount of time to listen to podcasts. Um, Liam Printer's podcast, The Motivated Classroom, has
Yep.
been one of my favorites, and I like to re-listen to episodes as well. And the number of times that I've been on my way to work listening to an episode, and he'll give such a great no prep idea that I'm like, oh, I'm going to do that today, and I walk into the classroom and implement that immediately. So that's been one way. And then Facebook actually has a number of really strong communities of
Yep.
CI teachers. And I've learned a lot from those communities, and found teachers there to connect with. And, when you have questions and you ask them, there's just such a wealth of experience and knowledge. Um, so those have been really good too.
Yeah. Before there was the Facebook, we had something called the More TPRS list. It was a Yahoo.
Mm-hmm.
It was really old. It was a few years old when I joined it in 2001, but that's where everybody did that. And then Yahoo
Mm-hmm.
groups closed down and Facebook groups became something. And so we have those Facebook groups. So, yes, I'm with you there. It's the same place to be able um, to connect with people all over. And in fact, that's
Yeah.
how I found a job when I got laid off in California when the economy got bad in 2005. I had two job opportunities, one to work with Carmen Andrews in Las Vegas and the other to work with Bryce Hedstrom in Colorado. And I ended up working with Carmen Andrews in Las Vegas for 7 years. And I met her on the More TPRS list. So it was really a great way to do that. And then when you talk about the podcast, Liam Printer's another person I met at, the Agen conference in France. If you've never gone, I highly recommend going. Yeah. It's one of the best ones.
Yeah.
Languages are discussions are happening in multiple languages simultaneously. It's incredible. It's a small little town outside of Toulouse. It's beautiful, walkable. It's just a great experience all day long. But unlike you, I have a half an hour commute each way. I cannot listen to a podcast in the car because I want to take notes and there's things I want to write down, and I can't do that, and I'll frustrate me. And my memory, I'll be like in the car, go, okay, I got 3 things I need to do when I first get into my classroom, 1, 2, and 3, and by the time I get to my classroom, I don't remember any of them. So they're completely gone. So I need to be able to write it down. So I do them at home, sitting where I'm at now, my computer, and I have my tablet to write my little notes down as I go through because there's so many nuggets that you get.
There is.
So many different ideas that you get. And so I could never do it while driving, but I'm with you. Podcasts are just incredible. I loved it when Bill Van Patten did his. At the beginning, he did 2 versions of it. That was really great. That kind of got the start.
With BVP was one of the podcasts that I listened to early on when I was starting to explore CI. And it wasn't new, like they had all been previously recorded. But that was a very, very informative.
I got to listen to them during my lunch period because when they came on, it happened to be my lunch period, and I could listen to part of it at least live on there. So that was always kind of. Last question for you. Do you have any advice for any new CI teachers who are thinking about making the jump or have made the jump, but they're nervous, they're a little unsure of themselves?
I think that getting connected is important. I think that picking 1 or 2 things to really sink your teeth into. When I started, I call it, I'm a vegetarian, so it's a bit funny to call it my meat and potatoes, but my meat and potatoes is like my TPRS and my free voluntary reading and some novel studies. Those are like my meat and potatoes. That's like the bulk of what I do. And then as I've progressed, I've added stuff along the way a little bit at a time. So I think just picking somewhere to start. And I think that the last thing that's really important is to be true to yourself and your own identity, and don't feel the need to try to be somebody else, right? Like, I admire Liam Printer. I admire Adriana Ramirez, but I am not and cannot be them. I can only be Shawna Sache in this classroom, in this context, at this time. And so I have to embrace what feels right for me in my space, in my practice, for my students, for the kids that I have in front of me.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that because it's come up in all 3 of our interviews we've done so far, that, you can't be a Blaine Ray or Adriana or Liam. You can only be yourself, and a lot of people feel intimidated because they see these superstars, and then they say, it's great, I can see how it works. I'm not that type of a person, so I can't picture myself. And in fact, during the national TPRS conferences for many years, it was Blaine and his son taught level 1, the beginning for the beginners. And we had to stop it because nobody was converting, because what Blaine can't even explain what he does. Someone else explained it and put it into a book about what he does. He can't tell you what he does. He just does it. It's magical for him. And it's magical seeing him do it. But then you watch it and you're like, that's amazing. I can't do that. So he wasn't converting anybody to actually progress and learn. So they put other teachers in there who are everyday teachers to teach that level 1 and let the Blaine and Vaughn teach the upper, the later. And it worked so much more successfully. And then another gem that you pointed out was taking 1 or 2 activities. Susan Gross, who's retired from both teaching and from doing the trainings that she used to be a presenter, she used to always say, I would never recommend everybody going 100% in the first day. It's way too much. But look at one activity from your textbook that you can replace with a CI activity.
Mm-hmm.
Master that activity. It may take you a week. It may take you a month. It may take you 6 months. And then when you've mastered that, then take away another textbook activity and replace it with another CI activity,
Mm-hmm.
and then master that one. And I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
really good piece of advice. Start small. Only bite off what you can chew. Work on making that well. You know how we are all perfectionists and control
Mm-hmm.
freaks. And then you can add more. I really appreciate that. That's a great sentiment. And one last thing. How can people connect with you?
I am on Instagram, pour que tu saches, which is a play on words of my last name because it is the subjunctive conjugation of the verb savoir.
So let me get
So
POUR.
POURQUETUSACHES.
Okay, let me see if this came up. Tell me if that came up right.
Oh, I don't. Hang on, I gotta open
Oh,
the
you can't
chat.
see it.
Pour que
It's on my
no.
Instagram. I have it on my Instagram, but let me see.
There's a Q where there should be a T and there's an extra H after the S there that you've got, but it's close.
Oh,
It's
I just want to put it up there
POUR.
right.
Yeah,
QUE
QUETU.
T. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. And then
And then SACHES.
CHES.
Yeah. Pour que tu saches. That's it.
Okay. Then now I'll put that one on the screen so everybody can see it.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So follow her on Instagram. I am a follower on Instagram. She's got some great stuff that she posts on there. I want to thank you so much, Shawna, for joining us today. I really appreciate your insights and your experience and your stories. It's been very helpful, I'm sure, not only to me, but to you. And I always forget, so before I do that, let me tell everybody. Please like, share, and subscribe. I always forget to tell everybody to do that, but it really does help. And where is my little... I have my YouTube thing. Where did my YouTube thing go? I can't find my YouTube thing right now. Well, like, share, and subscribe anyway. It really does help us out. Get it to other teachers. If you know someone who can use this, please share it with them. And if you have questions, nobody put the questions here live, but if you have any questions after the fact, please put them in the comments and I will be sure to share them with Shawna so that we can get answers for you. So with that, I thank you so much, Shawna, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. And
Thank you. You too. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. Okay. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And let me put my closing.